Okay, here we go. So welcome to From Singleness to Oneness, Embracing the Marriage Designed by God. We are doing still session 4, but we are today on part C. And session 4 is Embracing the Interaction for Emotional Oneness. As you know, we've done 3 sessions on this topic. And today we're going to be talking about intimacy, learning to speak from the heart. The key question that we're going to be asking is, do you know how to speak from the heart? And what we're going to discover is that emotional oneness is nurtured when we practice intimate communication. So before we get into the lesson of the day, let's do a little quick review. We divided the oneness training in 4 categories. We already covered this first one, which is spiritual oneness. We are right now on emotional oneness, and then we will continue with the other 2 categories. But on spiritual and emotional, so far we've asked several questions. One was, which model are you using for your marriage? The other question we asked, which structure are you using for your marriage? We also asked, which compass are you using for your marriage? And then after we finished the spiritual category of oneness, we entered the emotional category and we started asking different questions. Do you make your spouse feel accepted? And then last time we asked, do you know how to solve conflicts? And that was the last lesson last week. Today, again, we're going to be asking, do you know how to speak from the heart? And this area of marriage is highly overlooked, and people don't pay close attention to it until they start realizing that they're growing apart. So I hope that this session is going to shed light into an area that you need to be very much aware of as you build your relationship. Before we enter into the full lesson, let me start with a little exercise here. And this is not a multiple choice, like we did before, but this is a personal question rather than a case study. And actually it is a multiple choice, but not a case study, I should say. So when I ask you what annoys you the most, I want to give you a couple of options here, and I want you to pick one of them. You might as well say all of them, but really pick one of them. Is there's one of them that annoys you the most? Here we go. A, when you have to repeat yourself because the person was not paying attention to you. Have you been there? It's like, what? But I just told you. You were not listening to me. Next one. When someone wants to talk to you while you're watching TV. You're watching the news or you're watching the movie or something, and you're very concentrated, and somebody starts like, hey, da 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 da. It's like, what? Can you just wait? I'm concentrated here. C, when someone calls you over the phone to just whine about stuff. And you go on the phone, it's like, oh gosh, I wish I didn't answer the phone. It's too late now. It's like, okay, are you done? The next one, when a person responds to your question with a reproach. Did you get my text? What? Did you know that my phone stopped working? Do you remember I told you this morning? So all of these different interactions happen on a daily basis for many couples. Which one of these 4 annoys you the most? If you have to pick one. Let's start with Trey and Eli.
It's funny, before you were talking about it, I was like, well, is it Trey doing these things, or is it like a client I'm talking to at work? Because that's very different.
Okay, this is Trey doing these things.
Trey, I think D doesn't necessarily annoy me the most, but I think it emotionally affects me the most.
Yeah.
So okay. If someone responds very defensively when I ask them a question, it kind of like shuts me down like instantly. So I would say
Yeah.
that one has the biggest impact on me.
The biggest impact on you. Okay. So the question perhaps is which one affects you the most in this case, right? D. How about you, Trey?
One.
So funny enough, so now that we're kind of using that criteria, right? You know, if Eli did it, I would also say D.
Okay.
Because that's what I was thinking. And it's funny because right before you called on us, I was talking to her. I was like, well, none of these really phase me. So I'll have to say D as well.
Okay. Yeah. So you see, D is very common. It's a very common interaction. How about you, Brandon and Hannah?
I would say A for myself.
A.
Yes.
Okay. So you just said something, and the person is asking you the question you just answered. If they were paying attention. Okay.
Yes.
How about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I would say I will be annoyed. A. A.
A also.
Yeah.
So in your case, it's like you realize that you just spent some significant time and energy speaking, only to realize that the person was not actually listening to you.
Especially when we are talking,
Yeah.
I expect the other person kind of listen when I'm talking, and because I'll do the same.
Yeah. So that also happens very often.
Same.
And perhaps once you're actually married, because you're together most of the time, and then you're interacting most of the time. How about Kelly and Jack?
Kelly eager to reply.
No, we both want to choose D.
Said C?
And the last one.
So you, I'm not sure I heard you correctly. You said C?
No, the last one, D.
Oh, the last one, D.
Both
D.
of us, yeah.
Okay, both of you, D?
But I can echo a little bit on A, because sometimes I probably can feel Kelly's frustration when she's repeating herself.
Yeah. A's too.
But
yeah.
The thing is, I have addressed that issue a couple of times. It's like, can you make sure we're in the same room and you say it? Because sometimes when I'm up in the kitchen or the toilet, I just can't hear her clearly what she's saying. After a couple of times, she just got angry. Like, why are you not responding? I actually didn't hear you.
When I was like 5 times.
So,
that's true.
It's not like, it's still the D is the
D probably applied
okay,
to
so A and D, they both have that effect. It's interesting because one of the things that you notice is that all of these experiences do happen, and when they happen to you, they don't have a good effect, right? They discourage you, made you upset, turn you off, and just frustrate you. But when these things happen, they are simply a symptom that we are not skilled in how we communicate. And the goal of this session is to help us understand a few dynamics that take place in that dimension of your relationship. Because, when we get married at the beginning and we have, this relationship, typically previous to getting married, one of the things that we did a lot was to talk. I remember that when my wife and I were dating, and we're both in graduate school. So I remember that I would get home, living in an apartment by myself, and I would call her and we would talk about how the date went, and we talked about anything. But before you knew it, it had been an hour or two, and you had like talked a lot, and connecting like that was very natural. Also at the beginning when we were on campus, sometimes we would meet each other, like, walking by, and it's like, hey, hi, how are you doing? And then before we knew it, it's like 20 minutes we were just talking there about whatever. It is very common that one path that leads to the relationship that ended up in marriage was that you spend lots of time talking with each other, and that made the relationship flourish. But along the way, once you get married, the natural tendency is to let that communication wither and starts just, disappearing, and is filled with empty space, silence, distance. And when that empty space is there too long, you start feeling so distant from each other that many couples decide to just, separate, divorce, or break up, because it's like, I just don't feel close to you anymore. We're not as close as we used to be. And what they don't realize is that the one thing they've sacrificed is nurturing that emotional oneness through intimate communication. And the way this works for a couple that has oneness is that they learn to live in that space of tension between the tendency to grow apart, but being very intentional in maintaining that space filled with good communication, because that is what nurtures that oneness. The more you communicate, the more you talk, the more you share, the closer the relationship will be. And interestingly enough, the same thing happens spiritually in our relationship with God. The more we are open with God in talking, sharing our lives with God, the more close we are to God, the more intimate we feel with God. But the more we stop talking to God and we shut down, the more distant we feel from God. And the same thing happens is because it's a relationship. And any relationship where you stop communicating well will suffer. So let's take a look at how these two different dynamics work. Because when I ask, how do you communicate? You are going to be in a spectrum. On the one hand, you have a style that results in emotional distance. And on the other hand, you have the one that results in emotional closeness. One is superficial communication. The other one is intimate communication. And you are going to be in this spectrum all the time. But your goal is to try to be very intentional in making sure that you are in the intimate communication category, and that is not going to happen by itself. It will be the outcome of a very intentional process. Because by default, you will have the tendency to grow apart. So let's take a look at how do these two different approaches compare. And we'll start with the superficial communication. With the superficial communication, what's going to happen is that there are certain ways and certain types of interactions and behaviors, tendencies that happen in the relationship that tend to erode that communication and that intimacy. The first one of these is what I call the business partners. I call them business partners because when you're around them, that's what you notice. The only thing they talk about is the business of keeping the house together, having the kids together, and having the bills together. So the only kind of questions they ask each other are, hey, did you take the trash today? Did you remember to pay the bill? Did you remember to call so-and-so? And that's it. The answer is yes, no, okay, good. And they do the business they need to do. And after they confirm that everything is working right, okay, I'm gonna go to spend time, with my Facebook or playing video games, or just surfing the internet. So they do not spend a lot of time together talking about personal things. No, because they've grown apart. But they still have to share the bills and have make a living. So the only thing that they interact about is business. When that becomes the predominant topic of your relationship, and when that becomes, these topics hijack the relationship, you know that you are on your way to emotional distance. One interesting thing that happens as well is that once you are dating, you talk a lot about each other and life and how you're feeling and things, right? But then once you get engaged, what takes over every conversation you have?
Wedding.
The
The wedding.
The wedding. So we're gonna spend an hour together today only, and we're gonna spend 59 minutes talking about the wedding and 1 minute talking about how you're doing. And you feel the pull, you feel that it's like, we are not talking about each other anymore. You're not asking me about me, you're just asking me about plans for the wedding, and you feel that the relationship moves to a second level. It's like suddenly you care more about the wedding than you care about myself, and that can be a very weird stage, because without realizing the plans that need to happen, I mean, you need the wedding to be right, and you need to plan ahead, but then business hijacked the relationship. And just as that happens during that engagement stage, that can happen throughout the marriage. The other category is what I call the La La Land traveler. Do you know what La La Land is? For those of you that English is their second language, like my case, this is an idiom. When you are not paying attention and you are daydreaming, somebody's talking to you, but you are like thinking about something else. You are physically present, but your mind is not. That's when they tell you, you are in La La Land. Come back from La La Land. And this kind of interaction happens very often. You can be doing the dishes and suddenly your spouse walks into the kitchen and starts talking to you, and you missed maybe half of what the person was saying because you were there, but you were thinking about something else. And the person did not realize you were thinking about something else. The person saw a body present in that room and thought you are available to listen to me. So I just start talking to you, assuming that you are going to pay attention to every single word that came out of my mouth, only to discover that, oh, you were not paying attention to me. So this happens very often. The La La Land traveler frustrates because when you realize, hey, you were not paying attention to me the first time, hey, you were not paying attention to me the second time, hey, you often don't pay attention to me. How does that make you feel when it starts happening often? Why it doesn't sit well with you? What does it communicate?
Distance.
Distance. You're being distant from me.
Yeah.
What else communicates to you?
You don't care about me.
Yeah, you don't care about me. Exactly. I am not important. It's like, your text is more important than your wife, so right. It makes you feel like secondary, and sometimes you do not know if the person is kind of being cold or distant because there's something else going on the person is not telling you about. But this is why this behavior starts eroding the relationship, because you start feeling that you do not matter. You are secondary. So you start feeling that way, on daily basis, and before you know it, you feel very distant. The next category is what I call the talker, and this is very self-evident. This is the person that comes from work, and the moment the person walks in, starts talking and says, you won't believe what happened today, and starts telling you all the details and all the story. And when the person is done talking to you, it's like, okay, I'm done. And then starts doing something else. But in no moment it asks you, how was your day? In no moment ask you a question to find out about how you were doing. And you may have several friends or people that you know, coworkers that are like this, that they like to talk about themselves, but they never ask you how you're doing or what you think. You know, they don't ask you questions. They just want to tell you their stories about their life, and it's the only thing they're concerned about. But when you ended up being married to one like that, it affects you in a whole different way. Because when this is a one-way street and the person is eager to talk and talk and talk, but is not eager to listen, how does that make you feel? Anybody?
Again, like they're being distant, or they, like Kelly and Jack said, that they don't care about what you feel, what you think, what you have to say.
Yeah, they don't care about you as a person and about what you are thinking, your feelings. They're not trying to connect at a deeper level, right? So it's like suddenly, it's like you feel like, hey, you're just using me. You just needed a pair of ears to listen to you. That's all you care about, you know? So when you have friendships like that, you can never grow closer to those friendships because you never feel like you are really caring about me. You're using me for you. So it's like very self-centered, and that is what starts being communicated in this relationship. So needless to say, right, that also starts eroding that emotional intimacy, and you start, you know, losing the desire to even spend time together because you know the person is not interested in you. The final one that affects negatively the relationship is what I call the whiner. And that is also very self-evident. What is a whiner? Trey.
Someone who someone who maybe complains a lot about different situations and scenarios, especially if they're not looking for any kind of solutions or input or help. They just want to whine and complain about them.
Right. So they're not trying to find a solution. They're not trying to be constructive in any way. They just want to air their frustration, and they're just whining, complaining, right? How what is the effect on the listener when you have someone that, you know, is constantly whining about stuff?
I know for me, that kind of drives me up the wall because I'm actually a professional problem solver.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
like that's what I do for a job. And so whenever someone comes to me, you know, with problems, you know, I want to help them. You know, and so someone who just wants to whine, they don't actually want help. They just want, I guess, you to listen. That's hard for me because it's hard for me to not try to help somebody when they're going through a situation or something.
Right. So your immediate reaction is to want to solve the problem, but the person is not interested in solving anything. So it's like, okay, then you realize why even engage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the difference between whining and sharing a frustration?
That's a good question. The difference between whining and sharing a frustration. I would say sharing a frustration may be, even if you don't want help or advice or, you know, any kind of input to solve a problem, we all need to vent from time to time, right? You know, to share frustration. But whining is more, it seems maybe more trivial. Like maybe you just want to complain. Maybe it's not necessarily about something that's impactful or something that's detrimental to you, but you just want to continue to talk about maybe even the same thing or the same set of things without any ask for help, but also not wanting to change them yourself.
Right. So it's almost a difference in not just content, but also the tone or the intention, right? So yeah, and I want to clarify the difference here, because I'm not talking about sharing frustrations, which is part of, oh, I feel frustrated because this happened and that happened, but the whiner is like, and it's like tiring. It's like, is this person ever gonna stop? It doesn't engage you to wanna even talk or listen. It's tiring, it's draining. And that's something the whiner doesn't understand. The whiner doesn't understand that it's tiring to listen to the whining, that it drains the listener. So when the person whines all the time about everything, then suddenly the other person becomes very passive. It's like, okay, I'm there, but I'm not even listening to you anymore, because I don't care. I'm not interested in listening to that. So it's like shuts off. So with this case, what ends up happening is that then you have the person whining doesn't feel that you are listening to me, and then the person that is listening doesn't really want to listen because it's tiring. So this whiner needs to learn to not be so negative, and learn to express things in a more positive way, and learn how to express frustrations without being so whiny about life and things. So these 4 behaviors are very common in relationships, very common. And once they all come together, they really affect the relationship very negatively and starts eroding that emotional intimacy. There's a verse in the Bible that gives us a very important advice as far as how to approach communication in the way that we relate to people. And this is found in the book of James in the New Testament, chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. Let me read what it says to you. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Okay, pay attention. This is important. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So I highlighted the action words there, the phrases, right? Be quick to listen, and slow to speak, and slow to become angry, right? The idea here is, look, pay attention, listen. When you listen to people, listen with the desire to really pay attention. And when it comes to speak, don't be so eager to speak, listen more carefully, and then speak, but speak, without hijacking everything. And don't get angry so quickly also, because when you have quick temper like this and you get angry about any little thing, then you end up acting in ways that do not honor God. It's not going to be the righteous thing to do. The problem is that even though this is how is the prescription of how we should interact, listen carefully, don't talk too much. The way we see this is that we switch it around. We like to read it more like everyone should be slow to listen and quick to speak and quick to become angry, and that's how many marriages work. So they are not paying attention to each other. They talk over each other. They interrupt each other. They don't let the other person finish what they were saying, especially if they're in a kind of like an argument. And when you realize, you're not listening to me, I quickly become angry, and if you ask me a question, I think it's stupid, I'm gonna reproach you in my answer. And suddenly the whole interaction is completely the opposite of what God's word says it needs to be. And now you realize why it tells us to do the opposite, because when this is what happens, the emotional distance starts taking place. So this is how the path to emotional distance look like. These 4 tendencies. When you become the business partner, only limiting interaction to the superficial business stuff, but never getting deeper into personal. La La Land traveler, when you're always somewhere else in your mind and never really paying attention to the person talking to you. When you are eager to talk and talk and talk, but you're not as eager to find out how the other person is doing. And when you are negative and you whine and complain with a tone that is just not edifying at all. When this is what dominates a relationship, you naturally will want out of it. You just want out of there because you just don't enjoy being in that environment. This kind of environment, I should warn you, is going to be your home. Unless you become very intentional in fighting every tendency within you to go that route. So obviously this doesn't work, so we're going to get rid of it. And we are going to learn what is the right way, okay? What is the way that leads to that closeness that we desire, that emotional oneness that we desire? What does intimate communication look like? Well, it looks completely different from what we just described. There are these 4 opposite traits that we need to learn, and that these are things that we become aware of and we intentionally, very intentionally, move in that direction. First, learn to ask intimate questions. You have to learn to engage. Now, I know that some people have personalities that they're very introverted. Maybe they think a lot before they speak anything. And they are not very emotional. So when they hear this, oh, you need to learn to ask intimate questions, they freak out. It's like, what? I do not know how to do that, and I don't want to do that. But this is something that every married couple needs to learn. And what do I mean by this? Hannah, let's go with you for a minute. For a minute. So if I'm talking to you and you're telling me, oh, I had a terrible client today that came, told me this terrible story. It was so frustrating, and this happened. And if after you tell me that, I ask you a follow-up question like, so how did it make you feel? What will that kind of question create in you? A desire to engage and talk more deeply, or will shut you off?
I don't get it.
Oh, she doesn't get it.
Oh, you didn't hear? Okay.
So real quick, like
So,
if you have a client, if you come to me, we come home and you're telling me that you had this client that was like awful, they're having all these problems and
then you
they
don't
were
wanna
making
listen.
you frustrated. And then I said, well, how did that make you feel? Would that make you more engaged to talk about it, or would it make you like pull back or distant or not interested?
I think I'll more pull back.
You would pull back?
Yeah.
She'd pull back.
how come? Why?
Um. because it seems like he doesn't really interested to listen to the story I share.
Okay, so let's because I'm not sure we are getting the idea clearly here, communicated, right? So if you just finished telling me your story and I tell you, okay, can we change the topic because I don't want to listen to about your crazy clients. If that was my answer, what am I telling you?
To stop.
Yeah, it's
That's
like,
what
look,
I feel. So
yeah.
that's why I'm gonna pull back and stop.
Yeah,
But
stop.
let-
I don't want to hear it anymore.
Mm.
But if instead I ask you, so how did you feel after that client left?
Oh, okay. Then I may gonna go on and tell how I feel.
So suddenly from telling me what happened, now you're talking about how you felt about what happened. And that's, you see, that's more personal.
The thing I never have that question before. It's like is I didn't he never asked me like that before.
Oh, okay.
How you feel?
Yeah.
How do you feel?
After I share a story.
Yeah, so that's why I'm asking you that question, because when we talk about learning to ask intimate questions, we typically in conversations talk about what happened, but intimate questions move from the factual to the personal, and the personal questions are more about what were you feeling, what were you thinking, what ideas do you have, what is your perspective. So whenever we are engaged in conversation, there are these questions that automatically lead to a more rich, more personal interaction. When you have that kind of conversation and you leave that conversation feeling listened to, feeling that the person cares about you. But that happens when we learn to ask intimate questions. So what are intimate questions? Questions that move from the factual to the personal. And those questions are about, how are you feeling about it? How do you feel? What are you thinking? What are your thoughts? What are the ideas? What are the perspectives that you have about the matter? So suddenly, if I can get into a window into your heart, your emotions, or into your mind, your ideas, your thoughts, your perspectives, the interaction becomes very much more rich. You see, but most people never go that route because they never learn that there were questions like that could immediately open a door to more personal interaction. So learn to ask intimate questions. How do you feel? What were you thinking? No, what were you thinking? No, but what are your thoughts about it? And also, what are your ideas and perspectives? That really makes a big difference. The next thing that happens that also contributes to having more intimate communication is being eager to listen. So often we are not eager to listen because we are concentrated on other things. And you are often thinking about just what matters to you at the moment, and that's why you're not paying attention to the other person. Imagine that I am, reading a text from my phone, and my wife comes to me and starts talking to me. I could say, "Can you wait because I'm reading this text?" Or I can say, "Sorry, what was that?" You see, and turn to her and look at her. I can go back to the text later. You see, I don't have to finish reading the text. and make her wait, I can make her a priority. Because what happens when I am telling her, can you please wait, because I'm reading this text right now. What am I communicating at that moment? What is more important? My phone and whomever is texting me. Being eager to listen means that you give priority to the person that is talking to you. And if that means turning to them, putting your phone down, asking again, sorry, I missed the first part. What was that? See, you are demonstrating that you want to engage, to really listen, to understand. We fail often in showing that eagerness to listen because we don't think of it as priority. We are wanting to do these other things and we feel that the person is interrupting us. The more you make the person feel that the person is priority and that you want to listen to them, that person will feel more valued and more respected and more engaged, and naturally will feel closer. You see? The third one is that we need to learn to discern time and place for a conversation. Because this is a big problem why a lot of the frustration happens. Jack and Kelly, you were talking about earlier, that maybe Jack, you're in the bathroom and Kelly starts talking to you from the other room. And it's like, okay, I didn't hear you clearly. That's why I didn't get what you were telling me. So that happens often. It could be that you're in different rooms. It could be that you are in the same room, but suddenly the person starts talking out of the blue. So for instance, I was telling you in a previous session that I'm a thinker. I'm an analytical person. Okay, that's how I'm wired. An analytical person is always thinking. So, and I'm always thinking about things that, at least to me, matter, right? So I may be, in the kitchen doing dishes, but that does not mean that I am paying attention to anybody that starts talking to me. Because I may be thinking about, let's say I'm counseling this couple and I'm thinking about something they said, and I'm like, thinking about something. And my wife comes to me and starts talking to me. You know what I hear at the beginning? I hear da 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 da, and then suddenly it's like, oh, she was talking to me, and maybe the first 10-15 seconds I completely missed. But why? Was that my problem? I didn't pay attention because I didn't want to? Or it was an issue of discerning time and place? You see, one of the things that we learn is that you don't just expect to be listened to because you start talking. That's the wrong expectation. You expect to be listened to you when you create the context to be listened to. So it will be very different if my wife comes into the kitchen when I'm doing the dishes and she says, hey, Pablo, can I tell you something? Just a little question. She's creating the context. You see, because she's giving me the opportunity to engage first. So, yeah, what is it? And then she starts telling me. You see, now she has my attention. But it's not because I didn't want to listen to, it's because there was a lack of discerning the right time, the right place. Sometimes you may be driving and the person that is not doing the driving may start talking about, all this other stuff. And the person doing the driving is like thinking about the cars, looking up and down, thinking what's the next exit. So there's an attention level that cannot take place. So that is the worst place to start sharing something that you really want to be listened to. Again, discerning time and place. Another one that is very common is the person that starts talking when the other one is watching something on TV, whether it be a movie, it might be a commercial, it might be the news, it doesn't matter. It might be the blank screen. As long as the TV is on, one of the things that you need to understand is that the TV is like a magnet for attention. I remember that whenever we would go to a restaurant that has screens, it didn't matter where we sat our kids. You know what will happen? They will go, and it's like, okay, we're gonna put them on sitting here so that they are not facing the screen. And you know what would happen? Like that. It's like it doesn't matter where the screen is. It's like it's a magnet for attention, right? So if you are in a context in which there is a TV on and you want to talk about something, you have to create the context. Just because you open your mouth does not mean that the other person opened their ears. If there's a TV on, there's a big wall between that mouth and that ear, okay? And that has to be eliminated for that interaction to happen. So if you understand that having a screen on is always going to become an obstacle for you to communicate well, what will be two things that you could do if you want to talk to your spouse or your fiance at a moment where the TV is on? What are two things that you could do that will show that you are discerning time and place?
You can, so if you're watching like a Netflix or something, if I want to talk to Trey suddenly, I'll often pause it and then like look at him really dramatically. I'll like pause it and be like, like that's pretty much exactly what happens. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's usually when I'm like about to say something about the show. If it was a more serious conversation, I would probably turn the TV off entirely and be like, hey, can we talk? Like pause it and say that. And if he says yes, then turn it off.
All right.
Mhm.
So, and sometimes let him do the pausing.
She's very strategic with who's sitting. So it's
Yeah,
most
yeah.
likely going to be her.
Okay, so there you go. And that way you can make sure that it's passed. But yeah, that's true. So you eliminate the distraction either by pausing it and being in the point of sight, right? If it's something that you need to really talk about, so can we turn this off and then go and talk about it? There are moments where the person is at the end of the show, 5 more minutes, and the show is over, and it's like, can I finish the show first? Because it's really like at a very important time, and stopping it now is gonna kind of like cut the emotional flow of it, so sometimes even giving that space for the person is like, I need to tell you something. Is it okay to tell you now, or you want to wait the show to be over first? Unless you are short-term memory, that happens sometimes. Like, I'm gonna forget what I want to tell you, so I really need to tell you now. But eliminate the screen. Do not just mute the volume, because that's a mistake I've seen people make. They mute it, but all the action is still going on the screen, and you know what happens? Same thing. It's like the eyes and the attention is gonna go to that screen. So do not do not underestimate the distracting influence of a screen, especially if you live in a home that has like a TV in every room. So discern time and place. Another area in which I've seen that couples lack discernment in how they discern time and place is in discerning the medium for how they're going to communicate something. I remember that one couple used to complain. The wife used to complain because she worked at this very high level job, and problem solving, complicated things with a team of people that she was in charge leading, and and she will get texts from her husband, emails from her husband, complaining about something. It's like, hey, you forgot to do this. Hey, I told you this and you forgot, you know, and it's like, no, you don't send an email or a text to your spouse in the middle of a workday to tell them that, hey, you forgot to hang up the clothes as I asked you to. You know, whenever there's conflict that we're talking about here, what is the most effective way of communicating something that is bothering you that needs to be addressed? By text, by phone, by email, or face-to-face? Which one? What do you think, Kelly?
It's face to face.
Face-to-face, right? That's always the best. Because what happens if you send a text? Can the person read your emotions in the text? Can the person read the tone of your voice in the text? No, you know, it will be misunderstood lots of times. So no, that's why if there's something that is bothering you that needs to be addressed, wait until you are face to face at home and then address it. Otherwise, rather than having the response you want, which is being listened to, the response that you're going to get is going to be one of being shut down, annoyed. It's like, couldn't she have waited until I got home to tell me this? See, so the discerning time and place is super important, and there's so many ways in which people do not discern it. So the nutshell here, kind of like in a nutshell, this category of discerning time and place is to remember that just because you open your mouth, the other person has not opened their ears. You have to make sure that you are creating the right context to be listened to. And finally, is the goal of being edifying. That when I communicate, I'm not draining, but I'm edifying. And if I'm going to share frustrations where I need to air my frustrations, one way in which you do that is by saying, you know, oh, I feel so frustrated because, you know, then you start sharing what. Can I tell you something? Can we talk a little bit later today? There's something I want to talk to you about. Can we talk about it later today? You know, you start creating an environment so that when you talk, it's edifying. But there are other things that have an important power here for being edifying. And let me put it this way. Based on your experience, what are some things that you have found the most encouraging when you've had interactions with each other? What were things that happened that made you feel uplifted, encouraged, rather than drained or discouraged? What comes to mind? A blank stare?
I would say the first two things on this list, actually,
Okay.
asking us intimate questions or being eager to listen, just like the other person being responsive, showing that they're, well, eager to listen. And, you know, just continuing on with the conversation that you're having. I mean, that's at a base level, that's all I'm really looking for.
Yeah, right. And that's very true. It's basically, you know, I felt listened to. I felt that you were really paying attention to me, making me feel important. The goal of communicating is that we are edifying. And if I'm a self-centered person, I'm not going to be thinking in those terms. I just want to, like we learned last session, the proverb that says that the foolish person is not interested in understanding, only on airing their own opinions, you know. And some people do that by talking, other people by, you know, doing the silent treatment. But there are a couple of things, in addition to the ones you mentioned, that I learned throughout the years that are very encouraging as well. Because they make you feel listened to, they make you feel that you value, that the person really cares for you. Send encouraging texts. If you know that your spouse is going to have something that day, where, you know, you are in grad school and the person is going to have a hard day at school, a test that was preparing for, you send them a text saying, hey, I've been thinking about you right now, and I want you to know that you'll do fine. You're smart. Or some people write little surprise notes, a little sticky note, and they put it in the purse of the wife, you know, and suddenly the wife opens the purse and it's like, oh, what is this? Oh, a little just sticky note that says, I love you. And that's it. It's like, oh, wow, that made my day. Also, when you pray for and pray with your spouse, when your spouse is discouraged and is telling you, you know, I feel this way, I'm not valued in my job, I've been really thinking for a while, maybe I should quit, what I do, you know, they're terrible. It's like, okay, you listen to the person, then what do? You tell your spouse, you know what, let's talk together about this. And you hold your spouse's hand and you pray for and with your spouse. You know how the spouse feels? Encouraged, edified. So how can you edify each other? How can you let each other know things in a way that builds you up? Little notes, little cards, little texts, a phone call, a little emoji with a little heart in it. I mean, there are so many ways in which you are going to make the other person feel encouraged, in addition to the other things listed here already. So remember, the goal of my communication with my wife is to be edifying. Therefore, there are certain things that we do not do. And this is something that we just had to kind of learn, as you know, from mistakes. Two things. And I want you to write this down if you're taking notes, because I don't want you to forget them. Never answer a question with a reproach. Never. Never answer a question with a reproach. Never. Okay? So what does that mean? Let me say, for instance, if I ask my wife a simple question like, Sarah, did you do the laundry already? Simple question, right? What is the answer I'm looking for? Yes or no? Simple. right? But what happens if my wife says, well, of course I didn't do it. Don't you remember what happened yesterday? It's like, basically she's telling me, why are you asking this stupid question? Anytime that you answer with a reproach, you are telling the person, you shouldn't be asking this question. And every time that you do that, you are pushing that person away. Hello, I already told you. That reply is a reproach. So never answer a question with a reproach. Is that clear? Simple but clear, right? Second one, if you realize the person did not listen to you and the person is asking you to repeat what you already said, do so without throwing a fit. Because chances are that there are times in which you also were not paying attention and the person had to repeat themselves. So take it as part of what happens, you know, that happens. Sometimes, for whatever reason, we just went to La La Land at the moment, didn't pay attention, that's fine. I'm not gonna get defensive and all play victim and start yelling at you and get upset. You don't have to. Expect that in moments, the person will ask you to repeat yourself. And at that moment, you will choose to repeat yourself without throwing a fit. Don't even mention it. Simply just go ahead and repeat the information. Because remember, you're trying to be edifying. That's your goal. So when these four things happen, asking intimate questions, being eager to listen, discerning time and place, and being edifying, when these four things are in place, what I'm doing is that I'm nurturing that relationship for emotional oneness. Now we are going into the direction of closeness rather than being apart from each other. But each one of these four is going to be something that you will not be able to accomplish unless you're intentional about it. So with this in mind, let's take a look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 14 through 18. Eli, can you read this one out loud for us?
Brothers and sisters, we urge you to warn those who are lazy, encourage those who are timid, take tender care of those who are weak, be patient with everyone. See that no one pays back evil for evil, but always try to do good to each other and to all people. Always be joyful, never stop praying, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Jesus Christ.
Okay, you read the very last sentence and it tells you kind of like what is the content of what we just read. It says, this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus, right? So you just read a list of behaviors that God desires to see in us. That's God's will, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So what are the list of behaviors? So this is I highlighted all these words for us that describe the way God wants us to interact with each other. So take a look at all of these words. I'll go one by one. Warning, that means we're going to confront certain things that we need to talk about. I need to point out certain things that need to be pointed out. We have that openness. See, if you ever need to confront each other, then we confront each other, but we do so in a loving way. Also, we need to encourage. We need to take tender care. We want to be patient. We want to do good rather than pay evil for evil. Be joyful. Never start praying, and be thankful. And think about those descriptors, all those behaviors. When that is true of your marriage, that's an edifying relationship. That's a relationship that is thriving. That's a relationship that you want to go to. But when all of these things are not true, then that's a relationship that's withering, that you don't want to be engaged with. And naturally, you're going to walk away from each other. You see how important all of those words in orange are. And what the reason why this verse is important is because it tells us this is what God's will is for us. That's what he wants us to see. So let's do a little review here. Okay, so let's start with Hannah. Hannah, what does asking intimate questions look like? What does that mean?
To ask the person of how they feel about, or ask him how he feel about the story, or
Right.
whatever that he's sharing.
Right. So what you're feeling and what you're thinking, right? So you want to ask those kind of questions. Very good. So don't stay just on the factual, what happened, but go to the next level. Second, what does being eager to listen, Jack? What does being eager to listen look like? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think be eager to listen is like being attentive. Like whenever the other party, your couple is talking to you, just trying to be emotionally engaged. Listen to what he or she is trying to tell you. Yeah.
Right. Very good. So engage and with everything you're doing, your body posture, and eliminating distractions, making the person feel you matter. You know, we often tell our kids, I need you to listen with your eyes. And what we mean by that is, I need to perceive that you're paying attention to me. So look at me when I'm talking to you. Because now I know that you are, you know, we're making eye contact. We can, so listen with your eyes. But sometimes even that doesn't guarantee that I listen with your ears. But very good. Now the next one was discern time and place. So Trey, how about that one? What does that look like?
Discern time and place.
What does that mean? What does that look like?
To me, I think, and I could be wrong, but discerning time and place means like if you're going to have intimate communication, maybe setting aside a specific time and place to have that communication if you're going to discuss something with your partner. And it kind of makes me think of an article I read from a therapist a while back that said she recommends that all the couples that she counsels have like a marriage meeting like once a week. And it's like a set aside time where that's the only thing you discuss. And it doesn't have to be long necessarily, but it's uninterrupted. The kids aren't talking to you, no one's watching TV, your phones aren't there. And it's time to help you ensure that both of you are being attentive. And like we're talking about now, you're asking intimate questions, for a fact both of you are listening. And I think to me that's what maybe discerning the time and place is. It's like setting a specific time and place to communicate.
Right. So you're paying attention to the context in which the communication is taking place, right? And you create the proper context for it. Different things that we mentioned as well, like make sure you turn off the TV, or you eliminate the distractions. Make sure that if the person is in the room, don't just start talking. Just because you're talking, they're not going to listen to you. Make sure that you perhaps say first, hey, can I tell you something? And So you are always making sure that the context is right for the conversation. So very good. And the fourth one, Eli, be edifying. What's the goal of that one?
The goal of that one is to encourage and to help your partner be a better person, like the verse that we read in Thessalonians. So encouraging them both when they're maybe struggling in some it, but also just maybe when they're like disheartened, and making sure that they know that you love them and see them. And it looks like our connection is unstable, so hopefully you guys can hear us.
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay, we just got a little notice. But yeah, just making sure that the person who you're communicating to like understands or knows that you care about them and that you want them to do.
Yeah. So it's a very intentional goal that shapes the tone, the ways, you want to be edifying, not a draining person. So these are the four things that we mentioned characterize a couple that is growing in oneness, and all of those behaviors are things that happen only when you're intentional about them. They're not going to happen if you are just thinking that it will just happen by themselves. So next time that you ask a question and the other person responds with a reproach, you have my permission to respond saying, remember Pastor Pablo said, do not answer a question with a reproach. And also, if you realize that you were not paying attention and you ask the person to repeat themselves, and the person gets all upset, you have the permission to remind them, say, Pastor Pablo said, remember, be edifying. So just be a little bit gracious here. Don't take it personal. Okay? So because once you do these things, whoa, so much drama dissipates immediately in the relationship. So now you can see the contrast between these two approaches, right? The superficial communication governs most of marriages, especially the ones that are in crisis and they have emotional distance. But if you are going to grow in emotional closeness, you're going to develop intimate communication, and that will take lots of effort. So the question here is, what will you do? You have the option. Your marriage is going to be what you make it. So if you're not happy with the communication, then you make it better because you can. With this in mind, let's do the true and false, and then we will finish the session with a quick story. Here we go, true or false. This is also in your notes. Okay, this is for you to respond to yourself. We do not need to hear the full answer from your side, but here we go. First, I have intimate conversations with my spouse in which we talk about our experiences, ideas, and feelings on a consistent basis. My spouse and I miscommunicate constantly. I normally fail to pay attention to my spouse. My spouse and I intentionally set time apart during the week to sit down and talk. My spouse and I go out on dates on a consistent basis. I try to encourage my spouse by sending emails, text messages, or by other creative means that show my appreciation and thoughtfulness. My wife and I set time apart on a weekly basis to intentionally pray for each other. I have the tendency to whine about things rather than communicate my desires in a positive way. I lack discernment in choosing the time, means, or location to communicate well. So as you can see, this true and false is going to be kind of like the diagnosis for you to do your homework. because this is going to reveal the areas in which you are the weakest and demand a little bit more attention. Okay, so in conclusion for the session, the last part, I want you to listen to this story, and you will see in this story how a married man became so emotionally distant to the point of wanting to commit suicide and also wanting to get divorced. And how is that he was able to overcome that the whole tendency and trap that he fell into. So let me switch audio here for a second, so you can actually hear. Let me hear.
Here. Okay, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, so here we go. Pay attention to the video so that you tell me at the end what's your take on his story.
I grew up in the synagogue. I knew of nothing else. As a matter of fact, I had very few friends who were not Jewish. There was a lot of racial tension in our city. So I was in about the 4th or 5th grade, and this friend of mine, Larry, came up to me. Out of the clear blue sky, he pointed his finger at me and says, "You killed Jesus." And I said, "I don't even know who you're talking about." You know, I was really scared. I mean, me? How could I? I mean, I was a young child. One of the people I connected with, who became a very good friend of mine, was from Miami Beach. And he was a guitarist, and I was a drummer. So we connected right away. He said, "So would you like to do some drugs?" And I go, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "Let's try it." What is this stuff? I mean, it was like the most incredible feeling I've ever felt. This is what I want to do for my life. I want to be a musician. I was just having the time of my life, not being home, being away. Kind of left my Jewish roots back at the house. So we showed up at this club and we set up our equipment. Attached to the club was a cafe, and there was this really, really cute girl. And I tell you, my eyes just went boom. I said, "I'm going to marry this girl." And I said, "Hey, how would you like to come with me?" She goes, "Okay." And I had our first child within a few years. We were immersed back into the congregation, back into that synagogue that I grew up in as a kid and that my family was instrumental in starting. We do business. I'm in the scrap metal business, and we do business with this fellow, and his name was Sam, his wife's name was Louise, and they were the sweetest little Jewish couple you'd want to meet. Monica and I take a trip to Vermont. On the way back from Vermont, we stop and see Sam and Louise at their house because they invited us. Louise, I've never met her before, but she's this real cute little Jewish lady, and she started talking about the Jewish Messiah, Yeshua. She was like, "You gotta hear about this. It's changed my life." She says, "You've never heard of Yeshua?" And I says, "No, I've never heard of Yeshua." And she says, "Well, I bet you've heard of him as Jesus." Louise, stop right there. I says, "I'm Jewish. I don't believe in Jesus. I was intrigued about this Yeshua guy, but this Jesus, no, it's not for me." So, but thank you, Louise. Thank you very much. Right about that time, I started having a real drug and alcohol problem. Whatever pain I was in or feeling, it would take that away. My dad passed away at a very young age. He was like 52 years old and died from cancer. Just gotten divorced a couple of years before that, and I mean, all this stuff was caving in on me. I had to drive myself to the emergency room because I was thinking I was having a heart attack. And as I was driving home, there was a stretch of road that usually had a lot of truck and car traffic in the middle of the week. I said to myself, "You know, I'm done with this. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to end my life. I'm going to kill myself." The first truck that I see coming towards me, I'm history. I'm done. I wasn't even thinking about the truck driver. I wasn't even thinking about anybody but myself. I was just wanting to kill that pain permanently. And in 2 to 3 miles, there was not one car or not one truck. I get home, and my wife says to me, "What are you doing home? It's the middle of the day." "You don't understand. You have no clue." And I took her engagement ring and her wedding ring, and I threw it across the room. I didn't know what was happening. I was out of my mind. I was just gone. And she was saying, "What do you want from me? What do you want from me?" And all of a sudden I felt this emotional thing. And I opened my mouth, and out of my mouth came these words, "I just need to be loved." And I go running at the end of the hall is our door to our bedroom. And I go through that door and I shut the door, and boom, I hear the door crack. And I jump into bed and I just start screaming, "God, help me. I'll do anything, God. Just stop this pain. Just stop this pain." I couldn't take it anymore. I was going crazy. And my wife walked in the room and says, "Your psychologist is on the phone. He wants to talk to you." "Yeah, what's going on?" He goes, "No, you tell me what's going on." And I said, "Well, I'm just having a bad moment here." He goes, "According to your wife, you're having a very bad moment." He says, "I want to see you first thing tomorrow morning in my office, and you're going to need to go to rehab." So I go to this rehab, and I get a sponsor. She said, part of the journey of recovery, it's a spiritual recovery. So she says, "I want you to start going back to your synagogue." But I would be faithful. I'd go every Friday night. I would be going to the service. They asked me to be on the board of directors, and I said, "Okay, I'll be on the board of directors." And after a while on the board of directors, they said, "We'd like you to be vice president." And I said, "Okay, I'll be vice president." After a couple of years, they said, "Okay, we'd like you to be president of the synagogue." And I said, "Okay, I'll be president of the synagogue." So here I am, president of the synagogue. I was sober at that point 10 years. My wife was having some issues on her own with drinking at that point. One day I just said, "You know, Monica, I think I'm done. I think we're done. I think we should get a divorce." Something happened to Monica. All of a sudden she was like starting to go in on Sundays with a Bible under her arm and heading off to a church. I says, "Just don't tell him your last name, because you know I'm the president of the synagogue." She goes, "Okay, don't worry." And I picked up the phone. I said, "Sam, I got a problem." He goes, "What is it?" "I'm president of the synagogue. Monica's going to a church, on Sunday morning. We're getting divorced." I said, "You know all about this Jesus stuff. Tell me, what do I do?" "Do you have a Bible?" And I says, "Yeah, I have my bar mitzvah Bible. At synagogue, we read out of a siddur, and we never even open the Bible. I mean, the closest thing we get is the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses." "Turn to Isaiah 53. I turned to Isaiah 53. "Turn to Psalm 2. And I said, "Okay." Flipped it over, found Psalm 2. "Turn to Psalm 22. And I said, "Okay, turn to Psalm 22. Read that. "Who do you think they're talking about?" I mean, if you're asking me, it sounds like they're talking about Jesus. But how could they? This is my Jewish Bible I got from my bar mitzvah. "Well, why do you think they're not talking about Jesus?" And I said, "Well, he was Catholic, right?" "No. He was Jewish." And I said, "Really?" "Ask God tonight what the truth is." So here I am lying in bed that night, and I'm like, "Okay, God, I heard some really strange stuff tonight, but I do know that you pulled me out of the drug and alcohol addiction. You saved my life. I'll believe whatever you say." So I heard these words like he was standing next to me. "This is the truth, and I love you." And I started crying. So we go to the Rosh Hashanah service at their congregation, like an hour and a half away. I felt something there. I felt like love and acceptance, and I felt like I was home. And then the service started, and I couldn't stop crying. Towards the end of the service, the rabbi gets up and asks if anybody would like to accept Yeshua into their heart. I was like, "Yeah, I do." But then I thought about it. I said, "Well, I'm president of a synagogue." And all of a sudden I felt a tap on my shoulder, and it was Louise. And she says, "God's waiting for you. He's always been waiting for you. Just reach out to him." I never thought I could be Jewish and believe in Jesus. I thought the two were entirely at opposite ends of the spectrum. But once I understood that Jesus was Jewish, it came full circle to me. I said, "Oh my God, I'm believing in a Jewish Messiah. It was a gift. It was a gift that I didn't even deserve. But he loved me so much. And he loves us all so much. And he loves you so much. Just ask him for the truth. That's all. Just ask him for the truth. What is the truth? When I cried out to God the Father, he saved my life. When I said that prayer to accept Yeshua, Jesus, into my heart, he saved my soul.
Okay, so here you have the story. How does this relate to what we studied today? So he's married. He has his family. How did he face the time in which he was going through struggle? What did he turn to?
So at first he turned to the drugs and the alcohol.
So first addiction, right? Then after that wasn't working and the pain was still there.
Then he wanted to commit suicide, but like he was saying, the story, it just like didn't come up for him to be able to.
Yeah. So then suicide was, the way out of feeling that pain. Now, all along, he had his wife. But did he ever open up to her? No. So he was carrying all this weight on his own, and he never, shared with her any of this stuff. So when he walks in and throws the ring at her, what is the thing that he says comes out of his mouth?
That he just wanted to be loved, right?
Yeah, that's the simple thing, is that I just want to be loved. So imagine all of this time he had been carrying these things, and he never had the opportunity until that point to have a healthy marriage where he could sit down with his wife and share what was going on in his heart, the struggles he was feeling, the pain he was having. And instead, it was completely shut down from her, until the point that he says, I want to divorce you. And that is where God came into the picture, right? And eventually all his misconceptions about who Jesus was became completely challenged. And then he realized, wow, Jesus really loves me. And then he gave his life to Jesus at that point. And as he said, he felt completely loved at that point. But turning to God became kind of like the best thing he could have ever done, because that's when he felt healed and loved. But previous to getting there, we see that he had a marriage where he was married to somebody, he was living with this person, they were sharing the house and the kids and the expenses, but they had no emotional intimacy at all. That could become you. That could become me. Unless we learn to speak from the heart. So you get as homework from this session the task of looking at your exercises and finding out what is keeping me from learning to speak from the heart. What are the things that I need to address and change and become intentional about? So I hope that this session was insightful, helpful, and gave you a little bit of framework in how you're interacting with each other. And remember, again, if you have not done the Enneagram assessment, I really encourage you to do it. You can get also the book that wrote back to you with the summary of the different personality types. And if you are facing deeper challenges where you need to meet with somebody to talk about them, make an appointment with me and we can talk about some more personal things that you don't want them to erode your marriage and your relationship. Okay, so with this, we conclude this session today on emotional oneness. And is there any final thought or comment from anybody? Any questions or clarifications? Everything is clear and good? Okay, so as we conclude, let's go with Kelly and Jack. Tell us one thing you take home from this session today. Just one thing that you take home.
Do you want to answer it?
Yeah, 4 styles to cause emotional distance. That's very new to us, but those are all very true.
Okay, so those 4 areas that cause emotional distance. That's good. So keep that in mind and make sure that they are not found in your relationship. Okay, do everything in your power. Hannah, what do you take home from today?
That is okay to repeat myself if I have to. When Brandon didn't or doesn't listen to me and shouldn't make a fuss about it.
Yeah, and practice that. Hopefully you don't have to practice it too much, but whenever it happens, remember it's like I can repeat myself and be completely cool about it, you know, and that will really help the interaction improve. Trey and Eli, what do you get from today's session?
I would say one of the most important things I took away from today's session is how important it is to kind of set aside time and space to have that intentional, intimate communication, you know, with no distractions, nothing else around you, to make sure that you're really in the moment when you're trying to address things.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, being in the moment, right? Engaged, present. Very important. And by the way, one of the things that we do now, my wife and I, is that once we put the kids in bed and we get ready for bed, rather than just spending that time, you know, like checking our phones or computer or whatever, it's like, no, at that point now we are just engaging, you know, we talk about the day, how things went, you know, the things we've been thinking or feeling, praying, you know, just whatever, having that time kind of like at the end of the day to just engage in that, being present. Eli, what do you get?
Let me grab the notes really quick. That will help me refresh. I think, yeah, I think it was good to add that rule of the no reproach, not allowed to answer with reproach. And if the other person does, being able to be like, hey, remember we weren't going to do that. Like, like we're not supposed to answer that way. Because then as the person who gets answered to that way, I guess, like if Trey were to respond with reproach, it gives me that little buffer of being like, hey, remember, let's take a step back. Like, we're not going to talk that way. So it makes me feel a little less like defenseless in that sense. But also then for me too, to try to remember, okay, don't just respond off of my initial feeling of like, well, what do you mean? Like, how come you don't know that, or whatever it may be? Because that's not helpful, and I don't like it when that happens to me. So, you know.
And when those interactions are completely like trimmed off the relationship, oh, it changes so much. It's like it's much more enjoyable and edifying. That's great. So you have some good stuff there, everybody, and I hope that you're able to do the homework again. Take time to reflect on how does it relate to your relationship, what areas need to be improving and addressing. So we will connect again next Monday at 7:30. And remember, we are meeting all the way through the end of the month, nonstop, because we want to finish the last Monday of May. Okay. So if for some reason you have to miss a session, just let me know, and you'll have access to the recording later. Okay. So have a good night, everybody. Now we'll be able to connect again.
Bye.
No.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.